As I've said to you before, chapters 25 through 32 are oracles against the nations, and they stand between the two halves of the book. The first half, death. The second half, resurrection. In the first half, the prophecies, the predictions, Jerusalem is going to fall. These are occurring between 593 BC and 586 BC, a period of about 8 years, when the people in Jerusalem are saying everything's going to be fine. The rotten figs have been taken out when Jehoiakim surrendered and the royal family was taken off into Babylon. A number of hostages were taken with them. Those are the rotten figs. They're gone now. Everything's going to be fine for us here in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is one of those rotten figs. He's one of the ones who's been taken away as hostage. And if you remember, on the birthday when he would have begun his priestly ministry, his 30th birthday, on that birthday, God gave him the new calling of prophet. And his prophecy for those 8 years is Jerusalem is going to fall. Now again, a little pop quiz here. Why did the Hebrews say Jerusalem couldn't fall? Sure, Ben.
Because of the temple and the Ark of the Covenant.
The temple and the Ark of the Covenant. What else?
The line of David.
The line of David. He's the Davidic king, has to be on the throne. What else? The promises of God. This is the land. Yeah. So, for all those reasons, God doesn't have any options here. God is locked in. And one of the things that the Bible tells us is, don't ever think God is locked in. The one thing you know when you put God in a box, you're shortly going to have a broken box. And so, the word has come. Came to Ezekiel prophetically. The siege has begun today. 2.5 years. Almost impossible for us to imagine the horror of that. During these years, several of these messages to the nations were given, and the ones we're going to be looking at tonight and next week against Egypt are all during those years, well, with one exception. We're going to see that exception tonight. But they're all given to Ezekiel during those 2.5 years of the siege. Then, in chapter 33, 6 months after the nation is after the city has fallen, in July of 586, the word comes to Babylon. Took 6 months to cover that 1,000-mile journey. Jerusalem has fallen. And then, when everyone is saying, well, it's all over, all the prophecies have failed, all the promises have failed, God lied to us, we might as well just settle down and become good Babylonians, Ezekiel's message is, Jerusalem will be rebuilt. I've said to students for many years, how would you like that congregation? When you give them bad news, they say, no way. When you give them good news, they say, no way. Some of you who are retired pastors have been in that congregation, but I'll not ask for any testimonies. But there it is. There it is. And so we looked last time at the prophecies that were given in chapters 25, 26, 27, 28 to the surrounding countries, and now we've come finally to Egypt. All of these 7 oracles against Egypt, except one, are dated. And you can see in chapter 29, verse 1, in the 10th year. Now that's the 10th year of Jehoiachin's exile. So Jehoiachin was exiled in 598, and so this is 588. In the 10th month, which will be December, depending just on where the lunar month happens to fall, but roughly December of 588. So here we are. Here we are. We're within the siege. The siege began in the summer of 588 and will carry on then. It began in the spring of 588 and will carry on until the summer of 586. Then, if you look at 29:17, here's the break. All the rest of these 7 oracles are in chronological order, but this one is not. In the 27th year, that's 571. In the 1st month of the 1st day, the word of the Lord came to me, and so forth. We'll look at that, and we'll try to think about why it might be out of order like this. Then chapter 30 does not have a date. Well, I say 1 to 18 does not have, 1 to 19 does not have a date. Then 30:20, in the 11th year, in the 1st month, that's going to be April of 587. Then chapter 31, in the 11th year, in the 3rd month on the 1st day, that's going to be June of 587. And then chapter 32 is in March of 585. So most of them are given during the siege, but this one is after the siege is over. As I've said in the background here, and I'll give a little more detail in the background for next time, but for all of these years, Assyria has been pressing southward. Assyria, located over here, pressing south, and eventually they had actually gotten to Egypt. And for a matter of about 10 years, in the 600s, around 650, the Assyrians had actually ruled Lower Egypt. Now, this is always troubling, but this is the Lower Nile, and so this is Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is down here on the upper river. So, for about 10 years, this is the high point of Assyria. And then, within a matter of about 25 years, it's all fallen in. Unbelievable. For basically 300 years, from the death of Solomon until this time, Assyria has been the dominant figure in the world. 300 years. Longer than the British Empire. About as long as the primary section of the Roman Empire. But there it is. But in 625, the Babylonians, with the help of the Medes are from Iran. So Iraq and Iran are attacking Iraq, the Kurds, and between 625, when the first of the Assyrian cities falls, and 609, they lose it all. The surviving emperor, whose name we hardly know, and the remnants of his army flee to the west to Haran, which we know, of course, from Abraham. And they turn and make a stand there. And at this point, the Egyptians travel all the way up to Haran, some 500 miles, which is a long way with a chariot and a horse. I've often wondered, did some of those chariots have seats in them? It's a long way to stand. And we do not know the reason exactly, but the best guess, and probably the right one, is the Egyptians wanted to keep some sort of a relatively weak buffer state between them and the Medo-Babylonians. So you have a big battle in 609. Remember, this is when the Egyptians killed Josiah. They're on their way north. Josiah apparently attempted to stop them at the pass of Megiddo and failed. Interesting, these details. This battle was somewhat of a draw, but the Babylonians and the Egyptians needed a victory, and they didn't get it. So the Pharaoh withdraws back to Egypt, and in 605, we've got the son of the general who had been doing this, a guy whose name we know quite well. Nebuchadnezzar came to power, and he decided, enough of this. So the headquarters of the Assyrians and the Egyptians at this point are over here at Carchemish, and Nebuchadnezzar brings his army there. Necho, the Egyptian, comes back, and in 605, Nebuchadnezzar deals a total defeat. This is the absolute, utter end of the Assyrians, and it also pushes the Egyptians all the way back home. Now what? Well, Nebuchadnezzar makes something of a triumphal tour down through here, basically demanding the surrender of everybody along the way. The Syrians, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites are a little bit out of the picture, but Judah and the Philistines. So, how are the Egyptians feeling? They're feeling threatened. Who's going to help them? Who could possibly be left to help them? The only possibility are these, and I don't do my map very well here. Let's see. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Remember, as I've said before, Edom and Judah are constantly fighting over this area. But the only people who possibly are left are the Judeans. Now again, remember that these armies basically didn't occupy they came in the spring and the summer and the fall and destroyed and demanded tribute and basically withdrew to winter bases. So every year you've got a new, well, maybe this year we'll get them. Or maybe this year we won't get them. So the Egyptians are constantly wooing the Judeans, and the Judeans are very willing to be wooed. So, the time has passed. It's now, say, 590. What to do? Who are we going to depend on? Here we are. As I've said, Judah, in its smallest extent, is no bigger than Jessamine County. This is a little place. It's a little place. I've told you stories before of my dad going with me to Israel when he was 82, and that was one of his comments. It's so little. He also commented that it was a rock pile for whom nobody would fight. What to do? Well, obviously, our only hope as Judeans is Egypt. Egypt has been a major player on the world stage for 2,000 years. By this point, the pyramids are 2,000 years old. Abraham and Sarah took tourist camels out to see the pyramids. They were 800 years old for Abraham and Sarah. They've been around a long time. Again, I'm in a discursive mood tonight. Before the building of the Pentagon, the Great Pyramid was the largest building in the world by volume. Finally, we Americans bypassed the Giza Pyramid with the Pentagon of all things. But anyway, I'll not talk about that. But this is it. So this is the background to all of this, especially during the siege. By this time, the Pharaoh has made an alliance with Judah, and in the middle of the siege, he brought an army out for a little while and then was chased right back home again. But that's what's going on in these 4 chapters. You think Egypt is going to save your neck? Sorry, it's not going to happen. Okay, chapter 29. What's the imagery in verses 3 through 5? Who is Pharaoh being described as? A monster. Where? In the Nile. He's a crocodile. Yes. And you remember in Job, Leviathan is described as a crocodile. Sort of a cosmic crocodile, but nevertheless a crocodile. And so that's the picture that we have here. Now again, we've talked about this before, but let me remind you, for the pagan origin myths, they're not creation myths. Creation is making something brand new. The pagan stories are not creation myths. They're origin stories, and the reason I say that is because something has always existed. Chaotic matter has always existed. That's exactly what modern agnostic physicists believe. We haven't advanced a step beyond the Sumerians 5,000 years ago. In the beginning was chaotic matter. Physical matter has always existed. In the beginning, God created. That book, among all the ancient myths, says, no, not true. This stuff is watery. Well, again, more than those pagans knew, this planet is mostly water. And it is out to get you. I read something by Dorothy Sayers a week or so ago that just grabbed me. If you believe that reality exists to meet your needs, you will discover it's hostile to you. And that will create in you a constant disgruntlement. You know anybody like that? And if you persist in believing that, you have chosen hell now and forever. Wow. Then I think of C.S. Lewis. Hell begins now. So, if you think the world exists to meet your needs, what you're going to find out is the world is out to get you. It's not your friend. So it's in that context, then, that the Bible, in several places, draws on these themes to say, this isn't right. But since the whole world is familiar with these ideas, we're going to use these ideas to make a point. So here is this great crocodile lying in the streams. And what does it say in verse 3?
I made the Nile.
The Nile belongs to me. What's the problem with that? It's not true. It is not true. Now, who does it belong to? Yahweh. Who's God? Yes. The Nile belongs to Judah's God. Who knew? What an amazing thought. Here's little Jessamine County, Judah. Their God made the Nile. The Egyptians understood the land of Egypt to be the gift of the Nile. And that's absolutely correct. If there were no Nile River, the Sahara Desert would go right to the Red Sea. But God made it. God made this world. Now, we don't have too much difficulty with that, those of us who've been raised in a Christian environment. But again, in that world, no, each nation had its own God, and those gods duked it out with one another, and sometimes one beat up the other. But this little nation's God had made the lifeblood of Egypt? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I think that's a fascinating starting point for all of these oracles that are going to follow. You started out on a wrong premise. You thought that you made the Nile. You thought that the Nile belonged to you. Wrong, wrong, and wrong. So then, it's picked up again in verse 9. Because you said, the Nile is mine, I made it, therefore I am against you. That statement, we've seen it a couple of times before in these oracles. It's picked up in verse 2, I am against you. That's not where you want to be. You do not want to be in a position where the one who spoke the universe into existence is against you. No. And that's the beautiful good news. Yahweh is for you. For you. He's on your side. He wants what you want. He wants to supply your needs. He wants to be for you. Now, how do you get from Him being for you to Him being against you? What has to happen? Rebellion. Accept His overlordship. Accept His creatorship. Accept your position as His creature, and He's for you. But stand up and say, I am God. I made my world. I don't owe anybody anything. And it's not so much that He has moved, it's that you have moved. And He's no longer for you, but He's against you. So then, look at verses 10, 11, and 12. I'm against you, against your streams. I'll make the land of Egypt a ruin and a desolate waste from Migdol to Aswan, as far as the border of Cush, Ethiopia. No foot will pass through it, neither people nor animals. No one will live there for 40 years. I'll make the land of Egypt desolate among devastated lands, and her cities will lie desolate 40 years among ruined cities. I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations, scatter them from the country. Now my question is, how does the biblical doctrine of creation relate to that? Some of you are doing your homework, I know. What's your answer?
As the creator, He can destroy, He can raise up, and He can tear down.
As the creator, He can raise up and He can destroy. He can make new and He can tear down. Exactly. How can the God of Judah say, I'm going to do this thing to mighty Egypt? Only one way, if the God of Judah is the creator of the universe. If He is, then all bets are off and anything is possible, because He has unlimited universal power. So that the whole idea of Pharaoh's false claim to be creator and the biblical true claim that Yahweh is the creator, when they come into conflict, here's the result. You have brought devastation upon the land. But now look at verses 13 through 16. What's God going to do? He's going to bring them back. It's fascinating that the same thing is said in Isaiah chapter 19, which is an oracle against Egypt. There, it's a little bit stronger in terms of redemption. There are going to be 5 cities, Isaiah says, that speak the language of Hebrew. One of those will be the city of the sun, Heliopolis. And it is very interesting that the first Christian nation was Egypt. The Coptic Church is the oldest Christian church. And many of the church fathers whose names we know are from Egypt and North Africa, Libya. That's where Augustine was from. So it's fascinating. But here, what's the point? They're going to be restored, but what? They're not going to be mighty. They're going to be lowly. And in fact, we don't know for certain, but it appears that in 568, Nebuchadnezzar did capture Egypt. And we know for certain that in 520, the Persians did, and basically I'll put a question mark here because we don't have absolutely firm literary evidence. Here we've got totally firm evidence. And from this point on, it is till you end up with Cleopatra fooling around with Antony. All those years, the Egyptians are trying to stick their oar in, trying to be somebody significant in the world like they used to be, and they are not. It's over. And that's what Ezekiel says.
So would that mean that, so the peoples that are Egyptians today, are they the same as before, or do they have Persian?
Oh, again, there was not a lot of occupation in these conquests. And the Persians didn't practice exile like the Assyrians and the Babylonians did. The Persians didn't move anybody out or move anybody in. I think we can argue that the Egyptians today are heavily genetically Arab, but that's largely because of the Mohammedan conquest. Okay. Now then, so here is this siege going on. 29, 1 through 16 is 588. The siege has been going now about 6 months. Then suddenly comes, we jump all the way to 571. And we have this interesting situation. Son of man, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, drove his army in a hard campaign against Tyre. Every head was rubbed bare, the helmets, every shoulder made raw. Yet he and his army got no reward from the campaign he led against Tyre. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I'm going to give Egypt to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He'll carry off its wealth. He'll loot and plunder the land as pay for his army. I've given him Egypt as a reward for his efforts, because he and his army did it for me, declares the Lord Yahweh. We've jumped now from 588, in the middle of the siege, to 571. This, in fact, is the latest dated oracle of Ezekiel. What's going on? In 2 lengthy chapters, God had promised that Tyre was going to be destroyed. He doesn't say explicitly that Nebuchadnezzar was going to do it, but the implication certainly is. So, what's going on? Why this oracle from much later? Judah has been exiled by this point almost 20 years. Why stick that oracle in here in the middle of this sequence of ones dealing with the siege? Still dealing with Egypt? Yes, it's entirely appropriate in this collection. David?
Tyre will later fall to Alexander the Great and exactly fulfilled with all of the city, the part that was on shore, taken and thrown completely into the sea, out to it, and then they make it
Right.
just a bare rock.
Yes, yes. So, yes, the prophecies, the predictions against Tyre are going to be fulfilled. No question there. What about giving Egypt as a consolation prize? What? Something to do with the 40 years? Could be, could be. And I should say here, God has not given me the answer to the question. So your answers are as good as mine.
It's going to be the part of it served a key role. For example, the way Tyre could be taken down in two ways. First way never happened. Alexander could fill it later. The concept of fulfilling, you could go in obedience and not accomplish, but you still accomplish maybe not the ultimate, but part of the role. And this is explaining the manner. So like what's the context, historical context for 2,000 years. This is the manner. If they would be like, why is Egypt getting punished? Why is this happening? Well, it's not a matter of like they failed. It's more like I own you guys, so I can give you to whoever I want. So I'm going to give you to Nebuchadnezzar as a consolation prize because he deserves it for being obedient, and we need to call that.
Okay, okay.
Reminder, I just put down, God does not always specify time. And he says, my time is not your time.
Okay, okay.
I just thought maybe that's just a reminder that it may not have happened yet, but it's going to happen.
Yes, yes, yes. And I suspect that that relates to this whole issue. So Jerusalem has fallen. Okay, all right. But Egypt hasn't. What about that? And in this context, God says, they will. I will keep my promises. I have said back here, Egypt is going to fall. They will. And indeed, it appears. Again, I say the literary evidence is not absolutely solid, but it clearly appears that, yes, it was fulfilled. Yes?
It was kind of a curse on Egypt too, and Israel, because they turned to Egypt instead of God and trusted in the chariots and horses.
Yes.
And God destroyed them that no one would ever look to them again for help. But that's what I thought.
Yeah. So there's a sense in which this is confirming, yes, what I said back there in 588. Am I a true prophet? It hasn't happened, it hasn't happened, it hasn't happened, but it's going to happen. And in fact, it did. And it was Nebuchadnezzar who did it. So that's my hunch, in line with what all of you are saying here about why it would be included at this point in the account, totally out of chronological order. Nancy?
Didn't Assyria fall in 577? Or, no, that's when the main Israel fell, Samaria.
722.
I was confused. I had a date on it.
Yes, the northern kingdom fell to Assyria in 722, 150 years before Judah fell to Babylon. Ben?
Would this function as a interchange in this section? As like a
It could be. It could be. I think I would rather see it as explanation. So, but, okay. So the word of the Lord came to me. This is chapter 30, verse 1. Son of man. Oh, I should say, look at the end of 29. On that day I'll make a horn grow for the house of Israel, and I'll open your mouth among them. Then they will know that I am the Lord. I think, again, that is saying, I'm going to confirm what you have said, Ezekiel. And the Hebrew people will know that I'm the Lord when I confirm it in that way. Okay, chapter 30, verse 1. This is what the Lord Yahweh says. Wail and say, alas for that day, for the day is near, the day of the Lord is near, a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations. A sword will come against Egypt, and anguish will come upon Cush, Ethiopia. When the slain fall in Egypt, her wealth will be carried away, her foundations torn down. Now, one of the things we're going to see on through this part of chapter 30, down through verse 19, is the naming of all of these locations. You start out with Cush in the south. They had been ruled by Ethiopian kings, and then they had been ruled by Libyan kings. I'm looking at the map from my side, looking at it from your side. Ethiopian kings, Libyan kings, Arabia, Kub, and the people of the covenant land will fall by the sword along with Egypt. The allies of Egypt will fall. Her proud strength will fall. From Migdol, which is up in the north, to Aswan in the far south, where the first falls of the Nile occur, first cataract of the Nile. Verse 8, then they will know I am the Lord when I set fire to Egypt and all her helpers are crushed. So he mentions in verse 13 Memphis, Upper Egypt, Zoan, Thebes, Pelusium, again Thebes, Pelusium, Thebes, Memphis, Heliopolis, Bubastis, Tahpanhes. Why do you think he's emphasizing these allies and then these various locations in Egypt?
showed how thoroughly Egypt is going to fall.
All right, how thoroughly Egypt is going to fall. This is not just a passing kind of thing. It's going to be from one end of the country to the other, and including all of the allies, including Judah, who have tied themselves to Egypt. You have hitched your wagon to a star, and it's a falling star. All right? What other thoughts do you have on that particular idea?
Is it just continuing this, what we talked about earlier in 29, of how they said they were, Egypt says, I own the Nile, like I own it, and God's saying, no you don't, this is just how far. These cities you think are yours, they're mine, I'm going to show it to you, I'm claiming this because I'm God. And so it's like this continuing, going off the manner, so like the means, was the previous chapter talking about Nebuchadnezzar. How is this going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar? To what degree? Because God doesn't just own the land, he owns the degree. Showing to what degree he's going to demonstrate his might.
I think it's a good point.
Well, weren't these areas also areas of idols?
Oh, yes. Everyone had his own idol. Yes.
So he was thorough in
Mm-hmm.
saying he would remove those.
Mm-hmm. Yes. One of the features of Egypt was, for much of its history, it was composed of city-states. So you would have the city-state of Memphis. You would have the city-state of Thebes and all of these others. And so, again, Ezekiel is showing how he knows this land. And indeed, God is going to take the land and he's going to take the component parts of the land. All of it is going to fall before him. He is, again, it's not Judah that needs Egypt. It's Egypt that needs Judah's God. And they've simply gotten it backwards. All right, let's look on then at verse 20. Now we've moved back into sequence. The 29:1 was December of 588. This now is April or March of 587. Moving down about a year before the final fall. In the 11th year of Jehoiakim's captivity, in the first month, on the 7th day, the word of the Lord came to me. Again, I don't have a final answer on this, but I wonder, what's your thinking? Why this dating? As I say, every one of the 7 oracles, except 30, 1 through 16, is dated. Why this careful dating?
Read the historicalness of all of this. So like in the days and time gives it a
All right. Number 1, I told you Egypt was going to fall. Oh yeah? When? On March 1st, 587. So yes, it gives that sense of certainty to the prophecies, and it does root it all strictly in history. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. As I indicated in the background, the typical picture of the pharaohs, really from the Old Kingdom, 3200 BC, all the way down into these collapsing times. The picture is the pharaoh has his arm raised with a mace or a battle axe, and he's pounding some poor desert dweller. What does God say? I've broken that arm. Your dependence on your strength, your dependence on your brutal strength, I've broken it. Judah, you are depending on something that is broken. It won't be healed or put in a splint so that it may become strong enough to hold a sword. This is what the Lord Yahweh says. Here it is again. I am against Pharaoh, king of Egypt. I'll break both of his arms, the good arm as well as the broken one, and make the sword fall from his hand. Turn back to Isaiah chapter 9. There is a poem here in 4 stanzas from 9:8 to 10:4. starting in verse 8, the Lord has sent a message against Jacob. It will fall on Israel. This is the northern kingdom. All the people will know it, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say with pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen down, we'll rebuild with dressed stone. The fig trees have been cut down, we'll replace them with cedars. But the Lord has strengthened reason's foes against them and has spurred their enemies on. Arameans from the east, Philistines from the west have devoured Israel with an open mouth. Now here comes the refrain. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised. Then in verse 13, the people have not returned to him who struck them. They haven't sought the Lord Almighty. Verse 15, the elders and dignitaries are the head, the prophets who teach lies are the tail, those who guide this people mislead them, so forth. Look at the end of verse 17. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand is still upraised. So pride, foolish leadership. Verse 18, surely wickedness burns like a fire, consumes briars and thorns. Verse 29, on the right they devour, but still are hungry. On the left they eat, but not be satisfied. They feed on the flesh of their own offspring. Manasseh, one tribe, will feed on Ephraim, their brother tribe. Together they will turn against Judah. Verse 21, see it again. For all this. It's not Egypt's arm we need to be worried about. Pride, foolish leadership, lack of brotherly compassion. Verse 1 of 10, woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey, robbing the fatherless. What will you do on the day of reckoning when disaster comes? And look at the end of verse 4. Pride, foolish leadership, lack of brotherly compassion, social injustice. For all these, his hand is still upraised. So I say again, it's not Egypt's raised hand, raised arm. It is Yahweh's. Verse 25, I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, but the arms of Pharaoh will fall limp. Now he's changing the figure a little bit. Across the ancient world, to be totally discouraged and hopeless was to let your hands fall. You see it in the Bible, several places, especially Jeremiah. They let their hands fall. And it's fascinating that in Egyptian, because there are no vowels in the language, you have to put little signs at the ends of words to tell people, well, which word is this? For instance, if we had, and I don't know how good my artistry will be here, but here's the word. Well, what word are we talking about? What word are we talking about? What is that? Let me do a better job of it. Yes, it's cut. On the other hand, if we cat. So anyway, you've got, for words dealing with humanity, you have little stick figures. That word would have to do with running. They have a word for to collapse as a result of fear or depression or discouragement. Pharaoh's hands will fall limp. Nebuchadnezzar's arm will be lifted up because he's my servant. But Pharaoh's mighty arms will fall limp. I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations, scatter them through the countries, and they'll know that I'm the Lord. As I've said, about, depending on just how you count it, about 74 times, know that I am the Lord appears in this book. Ezekiel is trying to make a point, and so is Yahweh. So, when Pharaoh attempted to break the siege around Jerusalem, he forgot one thing. He thought his enemy was Nebuchadnezzar. His enemy is Yahweh, who is using Nebuchadnezzar as a servant. In the final analysis, I think that is the lesson for every one of us. Whom do I really have to do? With whom do I really have to come to account? It's very easy for us to look at the immediate means and not understand, wait a minute, the Lord is behind all this. What is the Lord attempting to say to me? What is the Lord attempting to do with me? Lord, what do you want to accomplish out of this? Very easy for us to miss that. Don't do it. Nancy?
I think one of the things I'm realizing from this is we always think of, I'll talk about myself, we always kind of think of time now as God's there, but he's not as involved as he was in Israel, but the reality is that's not necessarily true.
Exactly. My son Peter, as I've mentioned to some of you, his wife is a Russian, born in Novosibirsk, which is straight down there. You look at a globe, it is right on the other side of the world from Kentucky. 5 time zones east of Moscow. But her parents grew up in Ukraine. They voluntarily moved to Novosibirsk, where a university was being founded, because they were pretty sure that Stalin would move them involuntarily if they didn't go. So Masha, Peter's wife, still has cousins and uncles and aunts in Ukraine. And so Peter has been involved with a Facebook post every day since February 28th on Ukraine. And one of the things that he has remarked again and again is the miracles that have happened, which Mr. Putin forgot about. He thought the Ukrainians would roll over and die as soon as the Russian troops showed up. Why didn't they? What has happened? And again, we've seen these situations where it's not merely Western weapons, but it's simply the way in which the Ukrainians have been led to act. And again, I don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. I want to say to you that we need to pray more intensely than I think most of us are praying, because Putin cannot lose this thing. He cannot lose it. And if it appears he will be losing it, what steps will he take? I think the world is closer to the brink of disaster than we may know. And so we need to pray. But yes, God is at work. He's at work today as much as he was then. We may not see him. We don't have an Ezekiel to tell us exactly how he's working. But we have the template here to know that he is at work. Yeah. Any other comments?
Yeah, as I read this, and maybe I'm off beat.
Surely
but
not.
As I read that passage too, I thought the same God who has prophesied that he will destroy in that arm that is stretched out still. In Isaiah, it is his right arm that comes and brings salvation. And
Yes.
it's with his glorious arm that they need to remember, I have promised you will return. My arm is still stretched out to you.
Yes.
Mercy.
Yes. Oh, I think you're right on target. It is the issue is the arm for us or is the arm against us? It's the same arm with almighty creative power. Yes. Yes. No, that's a good word. You're right on target. Anything else?
What I keep thinking about is, because they always had a choice. We always have a choice.
Yes.
God says, if you do this, this will happen.
Yep.
And we never stop to think, well, if I don't do that, what will happen? And if we don't do the wrong,
Yes. Yes.
then what will happen
Yes.
will be the right thing.
Yes. Yes.
We don't process it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 If we choose not to go there, we have chosen to go here. And this is a good place. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Great. All right. 2 more chapters next week. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you that you are for us. Thank you that your desire is to be for us, that you don't want to be against us. You want to be for us. Forgive us when we listen to our enemy and choose to try to supply our own needs in our own strength and our own way. Have mercy upon us, O Lord. Drive us back to the cross. Drive us back to the place where we admit that without you, we are hopeless. Without you, there is no way out. And help us to choose your way, to choose to surrender our needs to you, to allow you to meet them in your way, in your time, for that'll be good. In your name we pray. Amen.